Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about the incidence of rape, the increase, and some of the strategies being examined in terms of dealing with the situation. Obviously, a lot of things have to happen at once. Quite apart from the establishment of that special victims unit, they have to be, like the Home Affairs and National Security Minister indicated, and more investment in the social infrastructure and development of the country. The forensic lab needs to be reopened for one thing, and some of the issues with that being addressed as far as the suggestions that it has been compromised, that there's an audit being done. People need to know what is happening with that. How soon can we get the forensic lab back on its feet so that we can address those issues? One of the things that has bothered me, even in reading the Voice story this morning, a lot of it seems to be reactive in terms of, at least from the police perspective, and that's all they can do really, as you pointed out before the break, react once the cases happen. But even with the establishment of the registry, the sex registry, as somebody pointed out, I think it was the Trinidadian attorney associated with Zandali this week, pointed out, before you can have a sex registry, you must have the convictions. Right, which ties into what Alvina Reynolds was suggesting, that perhaps we need to look at a rape court, as has been established in other jurisdictions, that can expedite those cases, ensure that, as the Prime Minister also pointed out, that the way evidence is presented in court is changed so that the victim is not forced to relive, you know, those horrific incidents. But as I said, a number of things have to happen, a number of agencies have to come together. We talk about the number of organizations that have been established. All of them perhaps need to pool their resources and work together, because at the end of the day, we're all trying to achieve the same goal. You know, we need to look at the way we raise our boys and our girls. You know, perhaps as Stephen King has spoken about, and somebody alluded to, I think in the editorial of The Voice this Saturday, how we portray women in the media, how women allow themselves to be portrayed in the media. You know, although the suggestion is that how a woman dresses and carries herself is not an invitation for a man to rape her as well. You know, but I think we have to bear all of those things in mind when we consider and we discuss, you know, those issues.
All of that brings into consideration, again, another observation I've been making, and that brings into consideration to, again, our coverage. And that is in all of what we've spoken about, and in all of the activities that we report most, we concentrate on rape, rapists, the laws, the inefficiency, at the increasing incidences, but we hardly hear anything about the victims. And as a Trinidadian who responded to the Prime Minister's statement positively identified, he said that apart from the need to have those convictions in order to set up the registry, side by side with all the emphasis on going after the rapists and the perpetrators, as important and even more important is addressing victims, because only less than 1% of the actual victims of rape in St. Lucia have admitted or are prepared to admit that they were raped. But if they are given the forum, and if we in the press can be that confidential forum, it's starting to happen. There's one, the Star has carried a couple of articles where persons have identified themselves, whether by correct names or not, as rape victims. There are our colleague at the Voice, Rochelle Gonzalez, has interviewed rape victims who, you know, give information. Sorry, and if in our coverage we try to bring the society, not only other women and women who have not been victims, but men too who are not perpetrators and who hate the whole idea of rape as much as women, you know, we need to be able to address them, to hear how women feel, so that they too can share the message, to hear how victims feel, so that they too can share the message. Somebody yesterday in an interesting discussion on the issue suggested that we also have to address those perpetrators, the people who we want to name and shame. They also have to be addressed, to try to get into their minds to find out why you know, they would do such a thing that ordinary men would not think of doing. And in looking at the various reasons that were being offered, one guy just out of the blue said, well, you know, hey, but the same traditional thing that women encouraging it by how they dress and how they move. And then he came up with, he said that one of the his response is the song "Hurt It," "Hurt It." Women inviting men to hurt it, hurt it, and if women are prepared to go that far, can they blame men? Obviously, it is not an argument that one would entertain and encourage. But when people are prepared to, that is the sort of discussion we need. Looking into why a man would want to rape a woman, and also the unthinkable, insofar as some people are concerned, why a woman would want to rape a man, because it's happening here. The police have confirmed, like I've said before, that, you know, it's not as often as the reverse, but it also happens. So the discussion is important, but getting to the victims and the perpetrators is something we have to get into the victims' minds, because the number of women walking the streets, you know, whether in Castries, whether in all over St. Lucia, women who are walking the streets and passing the perpetrators every day, but they've been afraid because he's promised to kill them, or he's promised to do something. And can you imagine, you know, having to see somebody who has raped you, whether once or more than once, but who is threatening to kill you, and you know you don't want to die. So you're living with that for the rest of your life.
In that sense, now the number of victims widens, because it's not just the actual rape victim, but it's their husbands, boyfriends, children, you know, who are making suffer, because there's a psychological scar.
Yeah, there has to be a discussion about it. People have to, we have to stop seeing rape as, I almost said, not as the crime that it is. But we must stop treating it as an untouchable thing, not worth discussing. We have to start discussing it, like you said, with our young boys and our young girls who are growing up.
But you raise an important point that brings us to our next topic, which is the way we cover rape, moving just beyond reporting the incidents to a more holistic, analytical approach, you know, that informs, that empowers, you know, the readers.
But do
and
we
the viewers.
do we accept the responsibility, and do we accept the criticism?
Well,
do we take the warnings?
That is part of the issue, because this week we received some severe criticisms locally, also regionally, in terms of our coverage, not just of rape, but of politics generally. We're into the silly season, we're into election campaign mode, and I'm sure you're aware of the report that was carried from Trinidad, in which this media expert, that was the headline, media expert blasts election coverage of Trinidad and Tobago newspapers. And that's from the former head of the Caribbean Institute of Mass Communications, or CARIMAC, Dr. Everald Hussein, a name you're very familiar with, who criticized the major daily newspapers in Trinidad and Tobago over their coverage of the September 7th general elections in the country.
Dr. Everald Hussein, I didn't realize he was still around. I mean, he's been around journalism for as long as Rick Wayne has been around bodybuilding. He's a staple. Like I said, he was the head of the CARIMAC, which has been the only institution of journalism training in the CARICOM region. And he was also, has always been, when he was in the region, now I understand he's in the States as a result of this report, taking up residence at some university, engaging in, you know, the intellectual aspects of our fare. I did read the report, and it's interesting. What I'm interested in, what interested me the most was the methodology of his analysis. He went to Trinidad, or in today's day and age, he didn't have to go to Trinidad, but he monitored and covered and analyzed the front page or the entire issues of the last set of issues of the two major newspapers in Trinidad and Tobago.
Daily Express, Guardian, and Newsday.
Yeah, the three. Yeah. And he looked at what? Their last
No, the first 11 pages.
Yeah, the first 11 pages leading in a period leading to the elections. Right. And on that basis, he was able to identify where their heads were at, what their interests were, what were the issues they were covering. And he came to the conclusion that they were not helpful, that they were more in the what we would call out for the election, the bacchanal, you know, the mépris, the move-along aspect of the election, rather than seeing themselves as helping to help people make their minds up by providing them with sort of information that will help them make mature decisions in an election. I'm proud to say that St. Lucia is much further than Trinidad in that regard, not in virtue or by virtue of our coverage of election, but the increasing calls for debates and for the media to play a role, a central role in facilitating those debates between whether it is candidates and or leaders of the opposing political parties, debates on issues of relevance, issues that would be raised and tabled by the constituents they would be seeking the votes from. This hasn't happened in the Caribbean. It has started in St. Lucia, it started in Castries South and Castries Southeast. We will argue that, you know, it hasn't gotten to the stage where the two candidates, but the meetings were organized. The first one was held and one candidate did not turn up. And of course, the leader of the United Workers' Party has said that he's not against the debates, but he would prefer that they be done by another organization.
Well, we understand that the Media Association has written to both parties and has offered to organize the debate. So let's see how they respond, if they respond, hopefully favorably, and that it can happen soon. But we're due for a break. We'll take the break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation and our analysis and discussion of the media, its role in election coverage.